Hello. In December 2020, Fabian Rush, a professional video producer and friend to the remote viewing community, assigned target number 13120022 as a fun, voluntary remote viewing experiment. The target was about the ETs living in the Zeta Reticuli star system, and I participated in this experiment. In this video, I'd like to present my remote viewing results. But first, for those that haven't seen a remote viewing session before, I'd like to explain a few things. Remote viewing is a process that allows you to perceive things and information beyond your physical location or your place and time. It's different from other psychic arts in that it was scientifically designed for the U.S. military intelligence. As a remote viewer, you're never told what you're going to be viewing or perceiving. This is different from, spirit channeling, say, where you might be handed a photo of the person you're supposed to contact. No. In remote viewing, your conscious mind is intentionally kept empty or blind to the target, as they say. So your subconscious mind, the right brain, the intuitive self, can perceive more clearly. What you're tasked to perceive, then, is represented by a number, a target number, which in this case is what Mr. Rush is trying to explore with remote viewing. Now, if you think about it, gathering psychic perceptions about a specific place or thing using only a number seems impossible, doesn't it? But that's exactly what people who study remote viewing do, using the methodologies developed for the military. It's amazing. These techniques are now declassified, and you can read and learn about them yourself. And they do work. The team that developed the remote viewing methodology made many interesting discoveries, and you just saw one of them. The notion that remote viewing objects or locations can be perceived by people, viewers, using only a number, a target number. Now, there are a couple of other significant discoveries, and I'll mention a few of them. The first is the ideogram, a hand-drawn scribble drawn with no conscious thought. And for some reason, these scribbles seem to contain data, information about the thing you're trying to perceive. Information from the ideogram just seems to pop into your mind, and you'll see this demonstrated in just a moment. The other is perceptions written in two columns. Perceptions coming from your intuitive self, your right brain, your subconscious perceptions. They go in the left column. And the conclusions that your mind makes about that data, your snap decisions and your guesses, they go into the other column. And this is because the remote viewing researchers found that the left brain information, your guesses and so on, are generally erroneous. They considered it noise in your psychic perception. Here's an example. Suppose you perceive the color red while you're focusing on the target number, and you write red in the left column. But then the word apple might pop into your mind. While apples are red, the word apple goes into the right column, because that's potentially an erroneous conclusion produced by your left brain when it heard you think of the color red. These three elements of remote viewing, then, the target numbers, the ideograms, and the use of two columns, left and right, for left and right brain information, you'll see me use in my remote viewing session in just a bit. With that said, let's now talk about Fabian Rush's remote viewing target. Remote targets are described in words on a card like this one, kept secret until all the remote viewing is done. And then the target can be revealed to everyone. And Fabian created a short video when these targets were revealed. The target number, 13120022, like I mentioned before, is asking the remote viewers to perceive something, and in this case, he was looking for information about the extraterrestrials from the Zeta Reticuli star system. This was done using a very precise language. Move to the optimal positions to observe, describe, and sketch the land-based characteristics and potential biological entities living in the Zeta Reticuli star system. He also placed some restrictions on this target, asking viewers to only perceive during the years 1968 and within the Zeta Reticuli star system itself. He also created a second target with a different target number, which asked viewers to draw a star chart of the Zeta Reticuli system. But I only worked on the first one, so let's get back to that. Now, I'm not a professional remote viewer, and I make mistakes. And what's curious, and in fact interesting about my session, is I didn't discuss ETs in their home world and Zeta Reticuli. I was talking about them here, interacting with people on Earth. Now, I'm not sure why my subconscious did that, but I'll be discussing that a little bit more later on. There's evidence in the form of books and substantiated testimony that the ETs from Zeta Reticuli crashed in New Mexico in 1947. This is the legendary Roswell flying saucer crash, which I'm sure you've at least heard of. Now, remember, I didn't know what this target number was when I did my remote viewing session. Yet, my session started talking about these things like it knew details about them. And it even went further. There's a website you can go to right now called serpo.org that purports to have testimony from those having access to top secret military, the Red Book, which not only details the 1947 saucer crash, but also that a single ET survived and helped the military arrange a cultural exchange program between their extraterrestrial culture and the United States. As amazing as that might seem, my remote viewing session talked about these details as well. Now, this intergalactic exchange program, which was codenamed Crystal Night, took place in 1965. The ETs, who called themselves the Ebens, descended and landed somewhere in the United States, were met in secret, and left, taking 12 U.S. military volunteers, a team of research people willing to spend the next 10 years on the Eben home planet. Now, curiously, Steven Spielberg made a film called Close Encounters of the Third Kind, whose ending portrayed this very encounter. The exchange program, right down to the 12 researchers taken on board the ET starship. I think this background material now properly introduces my remote viewing session. The ETs from Zeta Reticuli, the Ebens, they came, they picked up the military research people, and they flew back. This first header page includes a big scribble used to get your writing hand ready for scribbling ideograms in the next few pages. It's not necessarily considered data, but sometimes there is target correspondence. This one looks like a swooping path downward, lingering there and then shooting straight up and ending in what looks like a big letter E. The real action starts on page 2, where I drew this ideogram. My immediate reaction to this scribble was I sensed some sort of planned movement, and I declared the ideogram energetics, which is a fancy word meaning energy in motion. My strategy now was to gather as much information as I could directly from that ideogram. I've been getting more reliable data recently by just tracing over the ideogram with my pen. Now, right here, the word researched popped into my mind. And then along here, I got the words long time. I wrote researched for a long time. And then instantly, the Ark of the Covenant popped into my mind, an AOL that fit those descriptions. Raiders of the Lost Ark movie I just saw a couple of weeks ago. Following that, the words landing lane and magnificent came to mind. And for some reason, all of a sudden I started thinking of the Nazca lines in Peru, another analytic overlay. This part of the ideogram felt like something eyeing or approaching a location. See how it curves around deliberately, then descending and hit or made contact with something hard. Now this part right here, I've seen this ideogrammatic symbol before. It means something fantastic, unusual, or metaphysical is happening. I indicate these sorts of things right on the ideogram themselves, so when I come back to the session later, I can sort of replay my thought process, almost like a record. When I probed that unusual metaphysical concept, I got nature's own, followed by Lord of the Rings, then mind games. Very curious. Maybe what's going on might seem metaphysical to me, but it's entirely consistent with nature. Like, for example, technology that I don't yet understand. Next, I had a perceptive feeling. I felt something was tunneling or burrowing through something, followed by the perhaps most unusual AOL on this page, the word stethoscope, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything else, but it might later on. Probing that unusual metaphysical thing one last time, I got the impression this had something to do with a physical sight of some kind. So now, returning back to the ideogram, I started tracing it, now going up. I wrote ascending and lofting. And then the AOL stratosphere came to mind, so I put that off to the side. Then along the top here, it felt like something was being carried or transported, and then curiously disappeared. Look how that curl just fades out right there. At this point, the Roswell flying saucer crash came to mind, and I listed that as another analytic overlay, concluding this page of data. Yeah, so I drew these concept bubbles to summarize things so far. The central theme seemed to be about some sort of approach and descent, with a periphery of perceptions like physical sight, some long-term research, and a metaphysical aspect, and something that went up and vanished. Yeah, so I started feeling a little uncomfortable with this target. Lord of the Rings, mind games, a metaphysical aspect, stratosphere, and Roswell, saucer crash. All of these things seem to be lining up with something unusual, something I didn't have experience with, something unfamiliar for sure. And these were coming straight out of the ideogram, so I had confidence in what I was reporting. So within the first page of my session, my subconscious apparently zeroed in on the ETs, at least indirectly, by naming the Roswell saucer crash. My mind made a connection with them here, it seems, on planet Earth. And curiously, these details match more than just the saucer crash in 1947, as you'll see. Now, it's interesting, I didn't talk about them in the year 1968, per Fabian's target cue, and I wonder about things like that. Why didn't it? Maybe this was a novice mistake, a mistake my subconscious made, a lack of experience sort of a thing. But there are other theories as well. Maybe my subconscious interpreted the words optimal positions to mean nearest me. Or perhaps my subconscious was confused by Fabian Rush's target reveal video, where this slide showed the years 1947 and 1965. And this was the time span my session reported. Whatever the reason, I do wonder about these things. And I certainly find all this very interesting. Let's see what happens next. I'll move a bit faster now that you've seen how I get my data. In the next page, I got the notion of an intended course, picking up speed, going faster, turning and looping overhead. And then right here, I was very surprised to get the word pioneers, which is a word I don't normally use, and I looked it up. It means persons who are among the first to explore or settle in a new area. Probing further, these pioneers were researchers going to a dinner table or a get-together, and they had or will have a nice time there. The words unforeseen death came next. This was a shock, and the first time death has ever come up in one of my sessions. I have to tell you, getting something like this gives you pause. You feel it. And in my case, I felt a bit flustered and maybe even experienced some doubts about my session. I tried to calm down and then get back into it. Time here was passing, and things were getting quiet. There was talk about a continued motion path, and then gravy circumspection. I realized gravy was my subconscious mind's attempt to soften the discussion about someone's grave. And circumspection was a word I didn't even know the meaning of. Sometimes when I remote view, I hear or perceive words I don't know. If you look it up, circumspection means a careful consideration of all circumstances and consequences. And this would be regarding someone's unforeseen death. There's some pretty significant correspondence between this part of my session and the Serpo disclosure docs. Those docs said the researchers were taken on board and put to sleep in bubbles. And unbeknownst to them, one of their teammates died while they were asleep, still traveling faster than the speed of light. When they were awakened, they learned of his death. Now, I wrote unforeseen death, a march or passing of time, things getting quiet, a continued motion path, and then grave circumspection. My ideogram seems to be telling this story almost exactly, together with their concern and circumspection, I guess, about his body, his grave. Perhaps this also explains why I perceived the word stethoscope on the previous page. So it seemed my mind continued its connection with the Ebens through 1965, where the cultural exchange took place in the United States, and according to the website, one of the U.S. military researchers died while en route to the Eben homeworld, which was a 36 light-year trip covered in 9 months. This apparently created concern or circumspection about what to do with the body while they were traveling in space. Do you bury it in space, traveling faster than the speed of light? Or save it somehow for 10 years and bury it back on planet Earth? Whatever the case, my remote viewing seemed to have good correspondence with the details in the military Red Book. Now, again on serpo.org, I was intrigued by the claim that the ET spacecraft took 9 months to go approximately 36 light-years away to the Eben homeworld, to the Zeta Reticuli star system. For whatever reason, that seemed kind of slow to me, so I did a back-of-the-envelope calculation. 36 light-years divided by 9 months, that's 4 light-years per month. Now, 1 light-year is 6 trillion miles, and that's a 6 followed by 12 zeros. So 6 trillion miles per light-year times 4 light-years per month, that's equal to 24 trillion miles per month. Here we go, 24 trillion miles per month divided by 730 hours per month gives you the whopping number of 32,876,712,328 miles per hour. I guess we ought to give up on rocket technology right now. Wow. Now, here's a few other interesting points taken from my session. As I mentioned earlier, when I practice remote viewing, I like to analyze my session afterwards. I like to understand how my subconscious talks to me, how it phrases things, the things that it presents to my conscious mind, what I write down. Here, for example, I seem to be describing the ET spacecraft resting near the ground.
Casual, routine, resting, visual of ground surface, rough terrain, scrubby bushes, brownish yellow soil.
Then I discuss the vehicle transitioning into operational mode.
Transition to operational status, calculation, plotting, upward, flight/movement, sailing, smoothly, effortlessly.
This sounds like stuff one of the flight crew or engineering staff might be concerned about. Sailing smoothly and effortlessly. Those are indicators of how well your equipment is functioning. I think my subconscious relates these details, or my conscious mind hears them, because I've spent a good part of my career as a technology product engineer, and my psychic perceptions seem to be filtered by that ingrained methodical viewpoint. And I think that's pretty interesting. Now here's another excerpt.
Summary overview. This target was described as having been researched over many years and alternately described as little is known.
That describes both the 1947 saucer crash and the cultural exchange program. Both of them, if you think about it, got lifted up and vanished. The military walked off with the Roswell crash remains, and the Ebens themselves flew away in 1965. And we still, to this day, know very little about either one of these. Now here's another one.
The subjects were non-human, further described as pioneers and researchers. The subjects worked together as a team. The subjects were attending or going to attend a party or get-together.
This actually could be describing something that happened on the Eben homeworld in 1968. I have no way to verify that, though. But it does certainly describe the cultural exchange meeting in 1965. And here's one of my favorites.
The subjects were actively participating in a game requiring them to find and retrieve something unknown in the hopes of winning a small financial prize at the get-together.
Look at how my subconscious is describing the cultural exchange. It thinks of it as a game. Now, if this is my subconscious talking here, that wording is very revealing. All this stuff that we do in our lives, it thinks of as a game. A game to find and retrieve unknown information. Wow. Here's another one.
The craft itself was described as being intelligent, aware, and referred to as having a feminine nature, or thought of as she.
Wow, this reminds me of the bridge of the Starship Enterprise, where the computer talks in a feminine voice. But there are also those that believe ET spacecraft are more intelligent than that, being fully self-aware beings that communicate with their pilots through telepathy. Wow. All of this information came from this ideogram, by the way. That sideways W there, I've seen in previous remote viewing sessions when they were referring to the presence of a woman. This is how studying old remote viewing sessions can be helpful. I recognize that ideogrammatic scribble as referring to a woman, and I asked the question, describe the craft itself, and it answered, indicating a woman. And this line break down here, that little lightning bolt, that looks like, to my engineering background, like a continuity break, an abbreviation. So that means to me, there's an abbreviated aspect to the way this craft travels, or jumps through space. Travel is therefore nonlinear, and all of this came straight out of my ideogram. Remember back on page 1, I wrote the AOL Lord of the Rings, an analytic overlay. But why would my mind think of that? I asked myself these questions. A magic ring of some kind? I drew a ring, and it started looking like a UFO. And again, according to the website, the 12 military research volunteers had all of their records and evidence of their existence removed, and they had no immediate families. So there was literally no trace of them anywhere before they started their year-long training and confinement on an airbase somewhere in the United States. Now my session mentions
some sort of assignment.
And then there was this vague reference to people in an aircraft hangar.
A visual of an aircraft hangar, dim light from windows, someone in uniform, possibly in Air Force Gray.
There's a lot of fascinating data here which bears discussion, but I definitely need to point this out. The tone of my remote viewing session started changing right around page 4. It started talking about a crash. It was almost like my mind didn't know which of the two events to discuss. So first it discussed the one in 1965. Actually, it discussed both of them in the first page. Then the 1965 cultural exchange. Then it started talking about the 1947 crash. This ideogram starts off showing a normal, controlled, smooth movement, but then it encountered a sharp glitch right here, then erratic behavior. You can see how my mind interpreted this squiggle as something being out of control, and then going down fast. I felt a bit funny writing the words rough and uncontrolled landing, followed by the word debris. That messed with my head a little bit, and I decided to take a break right there. But when I continued, my next ideogram started looking like an oval-shaped craft crashing into a cliff or high wall. And my perceptions were similar.
Glitch, sparks, implosion, panic, concern, danger, downward, descending, scraping, sliding, ripping, bouncing, lofting, uncontrolled, hard final impact, diagonal disposition.
My subconscious switched to a discussion about the now legendary saucer crash in New Mexico.
The occupants were not usual. They are used to traveling in this sort of craft. Nothing can be done.
I always pay attention to word-based perceptions I don't know the meaning of, and I sometimes get these during a remote viewing session. For example, here, I wrote the words megalithic ruins. I heard those words in my mind and I wrote them down without really knowing what they meant. So I pulled out my cell phone and looked it up afterwards. Megalithic, definition, relating to prehistoric cultures. A prehistoric culture? I wrote these words in the sense column. In other words, what does my subconscious mind sense at this crash location? And it responded by talking about megalithic ruins. It's talking about a culture that existed before our recorded history. Some of this stuff just blows my mind. So let me wrap this up before it gets too long. To summarize, I have to say that my session seemed to be rocking back and forth between the Roswell crash, or crashes. I now understand from Serpo.org that there were 2 crashes in the late 1940s, and also the ET Cultural Exchange Program in 1965. While my session is technically off target with regard to the written target queue, the data itself is actually pretty interesting, and I'm almost glad that I got this. Correspondence with the other published documents and testimony, especially those on Serpo.org, which, by the way, I discovered after my session was completed, is especially noteworthy. And with that, I thank you for watching.